Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Coach and Benway podcast. I am your co-host, Dr. Benway. With me today, as per usual, Coach Red Pill. He's interested in men today, as he is every day. He wants to talk about them because, he can't talk about anything else.
Yeah, the attractive men especially.
It's a condition I have to put up with every day. You guys get to live with it another day today. Coach, what are we talking about?
No, actually, we're talking about something kind of interesting. It came out of the weekly Bile episode that we did. We were talking about, the icons of masculinity in contemporary culture, in popular culture, in the popular imagination, and how Donald Trump is, at this time, he's like the only father figure that we have around. The father figure, as opposed to the grandfatherly figure. There are lots of those. The kindly old gentleman, like the Wilford Brimley character, who's like the kindly grandfather. But not talking about that. I'm talking about the man's man, the man that every woman wants to be with, and the man every guy wants to be like. That sort of like that symbol of masculinity, who is at once an exemplar and as a goal of what you want to be. Now, when I was growing up, I remember in the 70s quite clearly, the guy I thought was the coolest guy ever was the $6 Million Man, of course, the actor Lee Majors. He was a television actor, for those of you who don't know. And he was like a man's man. And we were talking about this issue of masculinity, that today there's a dearth of such figures, of like the man's man, like Lee Majors when I was growing up, and Steve McQueen before that. Today we have what? We have, what's the name of the guy from Guardians of the Galaxy? His name's Chris Pratt.
Chris Pratt. But I would say the closest guys we have sort of filling this role, and they're kind of exiting their time, would have been George Clooney, Matt Damon a little bit, and more
he's always a boy.
A little bit. But let me finish. You interrupted my flow here. And then Brad Pitt. Right.
Yeah.
Those guys had some element of that. Yeah. They're getting older, and now they're mostly known for their acquiescence to general liberal culture, right? As opposed to, I just need to live the lifestyle of George Clooney. No, you think of George Clooney's smugness when he wins his awards and talks about the progressive attitudes of Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my thinking about most figures of masculinity today is that they're basically overgrown adolescents. I mean, like Matt Damon, like Chris Pratt, like Chris Pine. All these actors, they seem like overgrown children, like adolescents. Not overgrown children. Let me rephrase that. Let me make it more specific. Overgrown teenagers. And they're always at a loss. They never seem to have true self-confidence and competence, except the Jason Bourne figure of Matt Damon. You can look at these actors in all of their roles. They're always sort of like the clueless kidult who doesn't know what he's doing. That concept of the kidult, that seems to be endemic among these masculine figures of the contemporary culture. Or am I missing somebody? Is there somebody like masculine around? Because they all seem like these adolescents or these cuckolded, gelded soy boys whom I despise, with a big open mouth and showing lots of teeth and these static smiles and their Instagram pictures. I mean, I find them physically repulsive. Or maybe I'm exaggerating.
There's probably a number of elements to this. Yes, there's an attitude towards men, but if you also think about what are the big films that are notable to the public attention out, they're invariably all the superhero films. And what do you notice about them? Well, most of the characters most of us are responding to the costumes. They're usually a lot of facial obstruction, and they're basically childish movies in a lot of regard. Even the comic books themselves are more interesting than the movie versions of them.
Yeah.
by virtue of just the movies having to appeal to a very general audience. So I think that contributes to, there's not really a platform for it, in addition to everything else you kind of said. And now, when I was a kid, I also remember that it wasn't just that there were masculine figures to look up to, there was a pantheon of them.
Yeah.
And I mean, not only the guys who were already gone by the time I was around, the Humphrey Bogarts, the Clark Gables of the world, but even just active guys. There was, closer to my time, it would be Mel Gibson and Bruce Willis. This was during the age of Lethal Weapon and Die Hard.
Yeah.
They were there. In addition to those guys, you had the older guys who were still active. You had Jack Nicholson, you had Clint Eastwood, you had Paul Newman. You can go down you had Tom Cruise, frankly.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, he basically stopped being an adolescent boy around the time of probably Top Gun, and became more of an action-oriented kind of guy. There was a lot at play there as we kind of moved on, and I don't know that I could play the exact game of which movie kind of changed it, but I would say that there was probably around the time that CGI epics took off that kind of transitioned towards, like, well, if there's any kind of action oriented hero, it's hidden behind layers of costume and CGI. And if you look at comedy, right, well, comedy kind of took it into men are no longer funny by themselves. They are objects of fun. You know what I mean?
Objects of ridicule.
Of ridicule, exactly. So if you look at your Seth Rogans of the world, your what's his face from Anchorman, Will Ferrell.
Will Ferrell,
yeah.
Will Ferrell.
They're jokes in and of themselves.
Yeah, they're walking jokes. They're the butt of the joke. Yeah. But leaving aside comedy for the moment, because comedy has always been like its own little animal, right? I personally have, considering this question, I tend to think that Tom Cruise was a crucial figure, because Tom Cruise always had that famously boyish grin, right? He was always like the young man, the bright young man. And think of the movies that he made. There was Top Gun, and then there was Risky Business, Top Gun. I'm just skipping through his work. Then there was Days of Thunder. Then there was the one about the
Rain
sports
Man.
agent. Forget about Rain Man, because that was really a vehicle for the other guy. Jerry Maguire.
No. I disagree, but needless to say, you're on your rant. Yeah, Jerry Maguire, and then Mission Impossible.
Yeah, but the thing is, he's like the young man with promise. He's the adolescent, and he was the first movie star who sort of like put his adolescence in amber. Because before Tom Cruise, can you name of any actor who was the perpetual adolescent? I mean, even Marlon Brando, who made a name for himself as an adolescent, even Steve McQueen, who again also made a name for himself as an adolescent in The Blob, they became men. But Ron
Howard and Robin Williams never really became full men.
Well, Robin Williams, he was,
Robin Williams became Peter Pan. If anything, he made a movie how a man regressed back to an adolescent.
Right, but Robin Williams, again, he's sort of like a comedian. In his serious roles, he was most definitely a man. I mean, look at Good Will Hunting, for instance. I mean, he won an Oscar for it, a well-deserved Oscar. But I mean, hear me out in the theory. Was there ever a major movie star? I'm talking about a era-defining movie star like Tom Cruise, who was an adolescent. Because the previous ones, what? Mickey Rooney.
Mickey Rooney.
Yeah, he'd be like the only one I can think that you're absolutely right. But all the others, Clark Gable. I mean, the big stars, the ones that got the asses in the seats. Clark Gable. What's his name? The man who shot Liberty Valance. What's his name? Jimmy Stewart. John Wayne. Well, all these actors, they were manly men. The big movie stars, the ones who were like on top of the heap. John Wayne, Clark Gable, Jimmy Stewart, Humphrey Bogart, Steve McQueen. They were all manly men, not adolescents. They were clearly in their 30s, this eternal 30s kind of thing. Even though Humphrey Bogart, when he hit it big, he was already in his 40s when he started happening as an actor, right? But there's that sense that they were grown-ups. And Tom Cruise, to me, strikes me as the first of these adolescent movie stars.
Well, it becomes a question of when do you think youth culture became the dominant form of the culture? Arguably, the boomers were really obsessed with youth culture. You start seeing,
Yeah,
you
you
want to
saw it
see
with
young
Robert Redford.
representation,
Yeah.
right? So Robert Redford, but also Dustin Hoffman as well,
Mm-hmm.
in The Graduate in particular. Now, Dustin Hoffman, his obsession with being a character actor kind of prevented him from kind of continuing that. But Robert Redford, I feel like he tried to play it up, at least through a number of movies during the '70s and
Sure.
the late '60s, right?
Yeah.
I think he eventually had to grow out of it because simply he couldn't maintain the face, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah, probably the '80s is when you start really getting continuous youthful figures that you want to perpetuate it. Probably because at that point boomers are entering their 30s, 40s,
Yeah.
and they feel that we need to make sure there's young ones around us because we're still young at heart. I don't know.
But what drives me nuts about the current crop is that they're all incompetent. That is the thing that bothers me. There's the expectation that the male will be incompetent, will be a buffoon. Even in the films like the superhero movies, they're buffoonish. They don't have like a good plan. It's always the woman who has a plan, and we all know in real life that that's not the case. And, we know in real life that a woman, you put a little pressure on her, and she's going to wind up a puddle on the floor. They just that's just a daydream that's being passed off as
Well, yeah.
reality.
Well, 9 out of 10 times I don't believe this fiction of, oh, you're going to have the female lead in these who's going to really dictate everything. Very few of them have given good performances, but I do think the production of films is affecting this, right? Because if you think about what are the types of work that you would do in order to hone your craft and show that you actually have those capabilities to show that you're a confident actor, you're a competent actor, and you're actually doing roles that have complexity. Well, usually those come in the kind of mid-scale films, right? Not super minor budget, but not macro budget that we have to micromanage everything that appeals to everybody. Your actors of the past, even your Humphrey Bogarts, your Clark Gables, or your Jack Nicholsons, they started on the B pictures,
Yeah.
right? Or the middling pictures, which you had just by virtue of them being cost effective. You have a lot of creative freedom to say, just don't lose money and it's fine.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to just, kind of let it go. You develop the skills there so that when it comes time to take the big films, you actually do have a range and capability to command the presence and be competent and confident. These films, just by virtue of having to be just super simple products, you don't even have the opportunity to, one, build the skill as an actor, but two, when you're there, they don't demand it of you. So you are creating that gap, I think, in addition to it just culturally being accepted that, oh, the man's just kind of a buffoonish kind of part.
Yeah, I find it very. I look at it from the point of view of the audience, and the audience, especially young men, they don't have anybody to strive to be like, because in this effort to create movie stars or characters or what have you, that the young people can identify with, they create adolescents, and it's just a mirror, and yeah, maybe it's very good commercially, but as a culture, it doesn't give you something to strive for, and it bothers me for some reason that there isn't somebody that you want to be like. You want to hang out with these people, but nobody really wants to be like these people. Like Ryan Reynolds, for instance, to give an example of a contemporary movie star. He's incredibly handsome. I mean, otherworldly handsome, really. And yet the characters that he plays, I'm thinking of Deadpool specifically, it's buffoonish. It's never somebody that you want to be with, and you can't be like him because, he's just lucky enough to have been born very handsome. And so you can't be him, and you really wouldn't want to be with him if he's like this buffoonish kind of semi-asshole that he plays. And so it's just, I don't
Well,
know.
there's a lack of confidence to suggest that anything is worth emulating, because to say that would be to make a judgment call.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have the confidence to make judgment
No.
calls. If you say you want to be like, Cool Hand Luke, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Paul Newman in that film. You would have to say, well, his attitudes on the world and his approach to authority is what you would want to emulate. And I can hear to this day, it's like, oh, why is he sawing off the parking meters? Doesn't he know that those funding for the taxes go to schools and everything? You're going to get that whining,
Yeah.
right? And nobody wants to kind of put up with that. I mean, and obviously, I've circled around this character so many times, but it's truthful. Dirty Harry was a figure to look up to. A lot of folks, people freaked out at the time. They said he was a fascist.
Yeah.
Maybe he was, but that was something that you had to be confident in. Say, look, Dirty Harry is the man for the job, and that's the situation you have to kind of deal with. Everybody is probably afraid to do that, not just in the specifics of saying, oh, toxic masculinity, blah, 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 but just any affirmation. I can't even think of a legitimate female figure that people really want to look up to for similar reasons. And they also engage in buffoonery. Think of all things, the stupid way people tried to construct the remake of Ghostbusters.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, the original Ghostbusters wasn't a heroic film by intention. It was just, a bunch of Chicago-based comedians were just making a joke about, ghost hunters as basically exterminators.
Yeah.
It was just a joke.
Yeah.
They became heroic, but despite themselves.
Yeah.
And what they tried to do in this Ghostbuster film is take 4 female comedians who don't have any chemistry whatsoever, have them act like buffoons for a while, and then turn around and say they're heroes for the young girls. I remember that photo of the little girls saying like, "This is why we need female Ghostbusters," because it's a little girl with like teary-eyed looking at a bimbo actress, signing an autograph, and it felt so artificial, and it was just the patient rejected it.
Yeah.
It was a rejected organ. So even when there's an attempt to try and foster on like, this is what we want, it just falls flat.
Yeah.
That may be the situation we're in.
It totally backfires. Yeah. And well, again, it's this notion that by that you can have a priori political beliefs and that these will be picked up by the marketplace, and it's absurd. But the marketplace has rewarded these adolescent heroes. Frankly, the only sort of like manly man actor that I can think of offhand is Ben Affleck. I despise him. I dislike him intensely. I think he's a terrible actor and a lousy director and a lousy writer. I think that he's been given too much on very little talent. Okay. But that's for another conversation. The point is that, see, at this time, he's the only one who seems to be sort of like masculine, and they're all like brooding and depressed. They don't revel in their masculinity. You don't have like a movie like the Philadelphia Story, where the men revel in their masculinity. Yeah, they're all tentative about their masculinity or glum about their masculinity. The Philadelphia Story is a movie that is too complex emotionally and morally for today's world, and it's a movie that's 80 years old.
And the very first fucking scene of that movie would freak people out. So the scene, it starts with the kind of breakdown of a relationship between Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, and Cary's leaving his house.
Yeah,
there's no words to it.
Yeah.
Katharine Hepburn, they're divorcing. Katharine Hepburn has a smug look on her face when she's at the threshold of the door. Cary Grant looks at her, gets pissed off, and just literally takes his hand and throws her down to the ground, just shoves her back down. That would kill a movie today.
Yeah.
Violence against women, everything. The way he shoves her in the movie, you could tell it's not, it doesn't come across like, oh, he fucked her up kind of thing. It's just,
no, yeah,
he's fucking annoying bitch kind of thing. Yeah. And nobody's hurt. It's just he's asserting himself with her.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of assertion of masculinity is just not tolerated today.
Absolutely. I mean, and
I'd forgotten that.
There is that's how it starts. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, it is. It's the first scene. It's without dialogue. Billy Wilder directed the Philadelphia Story, right?
I think it was
Oh,
George Cukor, who is gay, by the way. I'm pretty sure. I'm 99% sure it was George Cukor. Now I have to look it up.
yeah, me too. George Cukor. Yeah, yeah, and it was a great
Who
picture.
was originally, by the way, here's another thing about how masculinity evolves. George Cukor was the first director for Gone with the Wind,
Yeah,
and he was fired because, of all things, Clark Gable was pissed because George was more obsessed with the female performances, wasn't paying attention to Clark Gable. Clark Gable says, "What is this shit?" And he got fired and replaced with Victor Fleming, who was considered a man's director. The funny thing is, Victor Fleming is most remembered not just for Gone with the Wind, but Wizard of Oz, which are either the most female centered or the most juvenile centered stories you could think of. But he was considered a man's man at the time, and he got a job on a female led film precisely for the reason that he needs to focus more attention on the male performances.
yeah. But what's funny also is that about Gone with the Wind, if you don't know, that George Cukor secretly kept on directing the actresses in the picture.
I can believe that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he met with them, with Olivia de Havilland and Scarlett O'Hara's name slips my mind. I'm terrible with the names.
Vivian Leigh.
Vivian Leigh. He met with them privately, and also with the maid, and met with them privately, and directed their performances from a hotel room. It's kind of weird, isn't it? But anyway, going back to the notions of masculinity.
That's a good,
yeah. What? Go ahead.
Yeah, but that's a good story to get into Clark. Clark is, even in a movie, which is, or not even just a movie, it's a book as well. A book that is so character-wise female-centric, they never nonetheless realized that the linchpin to the success of this film and the motivating factor behind the women in it would be the character of Rhett Butler. And everybody agreed, even the writer, when she was coming up with it, said, Clark Gable is the only man who can play this part.
Yeah, yeah, and most definitely. I mean, it's a brilliant performance. It's heartbreaking when his daughter dies in the late in the picture, because the picture is actually kind of interesting because it's really tight at the beginning, but kind of flabby in the second half. But even so, it has this the great exit line. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And that's just such a it has.
And it's a great story if you think about it too. What his character progression. He starts out. So it's those of you who don't know, those three of you. Gone with the Wind is a story set within the South, particularly within Georgia. Rhett Butler is a blockade runner for the South. Very much the men look up to him. He doesn't have much hope in the South winning this war, but he fights for them, and throughout the film he realized his loyalty to them increases as their chances of success decrease.
Yeah.
But during this thing, he falls in love head over heels with this snotty little girl, Scarlett O'Hara, who's obsessed over a very emasculated kind of foopy gay guy. He's not really gay, boy. But yeah. He's very soy. She loves him, and he's in love with another woman. But as time progresses, Clark Gable's character, Rhett Butler, just is enamored with Scarlett. He ultimately marries her, even though she's just doing it for reasons other than love. And as time goes on, he comes to realize this woman is a bitch.
Yeah,
in many ways, and then finally says, "I've had enough with you." Only when he says, "I've had enough with you," and regains his strength, confidence, and masculinity, does she realize, "Oh shit, I should have loved him from the first place," and now she wants him again.
Yeah,
that's I know people would say it's problematic now, but I think it's a truthful movie.
No, it's an incredibly truthful movie. Yeah, because what happens is that the Scarlett O'Hara character, which in the movie doesn't quite capture, but the book certainly does, she is a child. She is a spoiled brat. And so she's fallen in love with the equivalent of a teen idol, the very feminine, very easy and manageable from a point of view of a girl, man in the shape of the
Ashley Wilkes.
Ashley Wilkes, thank you. And yeah, she falls in love with him, but the same way that girls would fall in love with David Cassidy or Justin Bieber, because he's pretty and easy to manipulate. And of course, the natural evolution of a girl into womanhood is that she starts to desire a man that cannot be manipulated, But that kind of sexual dynamic is verboten today. You cannot have that kind of sexual dynamic. And if you try to have that kind of sexual dynamic, there are so many minorities that will tear you apart and say that you're being sexist or this or that or misogynistic or what have you. And so everybody's sort of like being beaten over the head with this shit, you know?
Yeah, the attitudes today, independent of the fact that they freak out over the fact that this book is set and somewhat sympathetic to the South, uh, set that aside, they would want the story of Scarlett and Ashley Wilkes. They would want them together because that is kind of the mentality now. Like this ultimately safe,
Yeah. Yeah.
genteel guy who's not really a risk to anybody. And Clark Gable's Rhett Butler's character is a man who mostly couldn't be tamed. He does kind of get tamed by Scarlett because he's infatuated with her until he comes to realize that was a mistake. But that's the interesting part of the story, and Clark can do that. I mean, even when Clark is doing comedy movies, a few years before this, it was was it
It happened
was
one
that
night.
movie? It happened one night. That's a kind of just a light Frank Capra-esque comedy of like a newspaper guy and a woman running away from something or just together on a road trip. Even in his goofiness in the comedy, he's still, a confident male.
Yeah.
And a lot of his jokes are, about his wisecracking ass. A lot of the comedy from these old guys, there were occasionally your henpecked characters, like most famously Cary Grant in Bringing Up Baby, who's a henpecked man, but he comes to basically get his confidence over the course of the movie. But there were these basically your Bugs Bunny-esque character who basically were smart, confident guys making fun of the absurd situation around them.
Right.
And Clark was that.
Yeah.
And that was a significant piece of that. And that is also a masculine confidence, right? It's the roguish rascal who kind of sees the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
That has now evolved into just smarmy smartassery, but not from confidence. It's a defensive mechanism. It's like,
it's
you're
George
all
Clooney.
assholes.
It's George
Right,
Clooney.
right.
Because George Clooney doesn't he projects confidence, but it's not real confidence. It's just a smug way of shielding fear. I used to like George Clooney more, but how can I put it? I sort of see him now as the tics that he's doing, because when you see just a picture or a postcard of Cary Grant, right? He looks just like George Clooney. But when you actually watch a picture and watch him behaving, like any of the Hitchcock pictures, for instance, that he did, North by Northwest, or which one is the other one that he did that slips my mind?
To Catch a Thief, and there's a number of them.
Yeah. There's a intelligence to him and a confidence in his abilities. But not just a confidence in his abilities, but a confidence that he can handle situations. And a forthrightness, but there's no smugness. I think it's the smugness that sort of like kills George Clooney. There's this his smug smile is almost really a smirk, and there's a sense that he's faking it in a way that Cary Grant is not faking it,
Cary Grant never came across like he had something to prove. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas George does. Even like I said, even in those early comedy films, when Cary is playing the henpecked guy, Cary just plays it to the hilt, knowing full well that I'll just let this character be. I mean, I don't have to worry about what does the audience think of me. And to give credit to guys like Cary, they were smart in the roles they picked, but they were also willing to do films where they would play the villain and not worry about it too much. So Cary Grant, I think, was a villainous husband who tries to murder his wife with strychnine in one of Hitchcock's movies. I think it was Under Suspicion was the movie. And
wasn't he?
similarly,
he wasn't the husband in Dial M for Murder, right?
No. That was Ray Milland.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But needless to say, they had that. I mean, and it's funny how people retrospectively look back in a mistaken kind of way with some of these guys. They think of these old stars and says, oh, they weren't really actors. They were movie stars. Because think about it. Cary Grant's always Cary Grant. Jimmy Stewart's always Jimmy Stewart.
Mm-hmm.
And Billy Wilder was the smartest director on this. He says, look, you guys are idiots if you think that they were just playing themselves all the time. they certainly had the persona they had, but try to maintain that. Number one, you know it's not easy. And if you look at what they're doing, they're hiding. They're not using the crux of changing the sound of their voice or their accents to govern the performance. It's the actual human being representation of their emotions that they're controlling scene by scene.
Yeah.
And it's a brilliant take. He says, unlike, and Billy Wilder used this words, it's different from the guys like Dustin Hoffman who think that if they play a retard that they're going to win an Oscar. He used that word in his interview with Cameron Crowe. He says he plays the retard and he thinks he's going to get an Oscar. It's easy peasy shit.
Yeah.
He was really dismissive of those later guys for thinking that, oh, you're a character actor and that means you're better. No, not necessarily.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think that well, there was something to be said about the method acting that sort of like inserted some elements that I think were necessary, because I think that American acting had gotten kind of stale. But that's for another conversation. What's interesting to go back to this images of masculinity in film, because I guess that's what we're talking about here. During the 60s, the method had hit and broken. That wave happened during the 60s. And you saw more naturalistic filmmaking. So the method acting, more naturalistic acting, coupled with the independent film scene, which relied more on shooting on actual locations, again, more naturalistic. It created a new kind of actor, a new kind of star, who were more, more real, but more approachable, and yet at the same time, because they were more approachable, in a weird way, they were more beckoning. Because, like, for instance, somebody like Clint Eastwood, or even earlier, who would be like big stars in the 50s and 60s?
Well, you would have the 60s a little bit more, but you would have Marlon. You would have what's his name, Warren Beatty.
Right.
You would have he's a little bit later, but he starts coming up. Gene Hackman, Paul Newman.
Well, Gene Hackman, for instance, he's a good example. He was a major movie star, right? And a very naturalistic actor. The French Connection was gritty as could be. It's just electrifying, really. An electrifying movie, an electrifying performance. And he seemed, because of it, that he was more approachable, that he was more reachable, and how could I put it? And that ideal of masculinity. But now it's paradoxically the opposite. It's like at once there's more distance, from the actor, and there's like, you don't want to be like him. Maybe hang out with him, but not be with him. Be like him.
Well, what's interesting to me is when you do have the 60s and the 70s come along, and you are moving towards that more naturalism, and there is a rebelliousness in the air. What was interesting to me is you still kept the masculine view of these male characters, but that masculine confidence was used in service of the rebellious attitude.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking in particular of, Cool Hand Luke.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking probably the best example overall is Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Right.
That is a masculine spirit. The force of the narrative of the villain is I have to break it.
Yeah.
Because that,
or Dirty Harry, your favorite movie,
or Dirty,
which is the system
Harry
has to break Dirty Harry because the system cannot allow a rogue cop, quote unquote.
And the system is afraid of these men, not the least by which is because they are confident males, who have charisma that lead others.
Yeah, exactly. They're afraid that by their example. The famous line of Cool Hand Luke, what we've got here is a failure to communicate, right? Mm-hmm. The whole notion is that this slightly effeminate prison warden is going to break Cool Hand Luke because he's a bad example. He's a bad example who could fuck up the prison. And he doesn't want that. He wants docile prisoners. And so he's going to break him. Well, he does in the end, just as Jack Nicholson is broken in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And it's kind of weirdly prescient that...
Yeah, they had to, and it's a violent breaking. For Jack's case, they had to lobotomize him.
Yeah.
In the film.
I forget how Cool Hand Luke went. He was killed? What?
I think he was killed. I've forgotten exactly how it happened. And even Dirty Harry, while successful, if I know leave aside the sequels, the ending of the first film, he succeeds in killing the basically the Zodiac killer.
Right.
They call it this. They call him something else like
Serpent.
Serpico
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or Scorpio,
Scorpio.
but it's basically the Zodiac killer. But at the end, he has to throw away his badge personally because he knows he can no longer be a cop in this system anymore.
Yeah.
So he is, in some sense, even though he wins, it's also some sense of defeat. He acknowledges he can no longer participate in the structure anymore.
Well, you even had popular movies like Rocky, where the masculine figure loses. There's a different dynamic going on between Apollo Creed and Rocky Balboa and all that. But setting that aside, you had like the loser who I mean well, no, I mean frankly, Rocky is a bad example because I just sort of like grabbed it thinking that it might fit because the loser narrative, but it's a different kind of picture. But yeah.
Well, Chinatown is another good one. Chinatown,
Oh,
J.J. Gibb
God damn,
is
that was a
a
horrible
very
picture. I mean, horrible in sense of morally and for what we're discussing. I think it's a wonderful picture, one of the best pictures ever made, quite frankly. And it's just an incredible script that talks about something so obscure as water rights and makes it fascinating. Makes one of the best pictures, best scripts ever written, beautifully directed by Roman Polanski. I mean, God damn, that was a great picture. But I mean,
but that's another situation where you do have this guy that instills confidence, but he finds himself over his head and unwittingly becomes the mechanism of a tragic conclusion.
Yeah,
within the film.
Yeah, but the thing is, see, he's there's a difference because he is insecure in what's going on. He's clear. He knows that he's over his head, but he is not insecure in his personhood, in his manhood, in his masculinity.
Right.
There's an insecurity of circumstance, but not a psychological insecurity. Whereas the characters today, they're all psychologically insecure. They are all fumbling, stumbling boys, self-consciously boys, self-consciously adolescent. And that drives me nuts because it just doesn't give an example. And the thing is, see, in my own case, I watch so many, I get so many comments and so forth from my subscribers, my followers, and emails and such. And these people, they are young men and they yearn for some sort of example of how to be. They don't want to follow the example of kidults like them. They want to follow the example of a man, and they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to do it. They don't know who to turn to, and there's no example around except smarmy people or morose people who are unhappy in their own masculinity, such as Ben Affleck, such as what was the guy, the Henry Cavill, who played Superman? And the Superman character, when he does what he should do, what is the morally right decision, what does he do? He cries like a little bitch. It's just.
Well, I gotta say, that's another thing. I mean, we talked a little bit about superheroes as well before, but I'll make this contrast. Funny enough, the first version of Superman still, in terms of film, is the definitive film to this day, which is Christopher Reeve, which is just fundamentally decent and confident. It's like, hey, I'll save the cat from the tree, or hey, make sure you follow the police, the stop signs and everything. It's typical, good old fashioned authority figure.
Truth, justice, and the American way.
Now they've completely gutted Superman by saying, well, he is clearly a god, but he doesn't like it.
Yeah,
he's uncomfortable with it. There are many ways you could take Superman. You could amp up the godhood. You could amp up the humanity in him, who's human despite having all these powers. What we've done now is just make them morose.
Let me ask you something. What is this fear of power? Okay, I don't feel good about it. I have this power, but I don't feel good about it. What is this fear of power, of exercising power? Where does it come from?
Well, I don't know that may necessarily be the case, and I don't know that they fear their power. I think they fear the moral judgment they'd have to make, because I think if people will still use the power they have, but now they're looking up to me as a god figure. In other words, they're looking up to you as a means of providing moral judgment. That's scary. That's the bit that they're afraid of. With great power comes great responsibility. To take the Spider-Man cliche, people are afraid of the responsibility. They're okay with the power.
So you think that it's an issue of they fear the moral responsibility and being seen as having done something immoral because they can't really define what is moral nowadays.
Yeah, they don't have the confidence to make the judgment calls. And I think what you see in the recent iterations of Superman is that anxiety portrayed, in a very obvious kind of way. And the net result of it is just this disgusting kind of bleak figure that's kind of a wimp of a human being. This is I mean, I do think people will disagree with me perhaps, but I think Cavill represents the weakest iteration of that character I've seen in a long time. And it's emblematic of broader things we're talking about. Because it's funny because Superman should be the ultimate vehicle for a masculine authority figure.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
The role is designed for it. And
Yeah.
they can't.
Yeah, and Christopher Reeves rather embodied it fully because he was a morally self-confident. He was portraying a morally self-confident character. I cannot speak for the man himself, of course, but he himself. I mean, his performance was of a man who knew this is good, that's bad, and there was no complexity to the issue, and there was no uncertainty to the morality of the issue. But the whole point of superhero movies is that it's supposed to be black and white and clear cut, morally speaking. And yet they are so afraid, even in such a morally black and white universe. And certainly it's morally black and white in the movies, superhero movies. And yet the notion is pushed that you should not have any kind of moral self-confidence. Even in a superhero movie that is, lowest common denominator, and therefore the moral questions will be the simplest and easiest to solve. No Sophie's Choice moments, okay? It'll just be very easy peasy, morally speaking. And even then, they are the audience is consistently undercut, and they are not allowed to have moral self-confidence. Man, it's just fucking bizarre.
It says again, I think it's related to our condition where we don't have a lot of confidence in asserting much of anything. So we don't have confidence in even going to a superhero movie and saying he should do this. I mean, think about, even if he were to make a decision, our response would be, you made a horrible decision. Think about the first Superman movie, the Monday night quarterback we all do. He says, oh, Superman, reversed the flow of time to save Lois. It's like, well, why didn't you go back 10 minutes earlier and save the fucking dam from breaking everything?
Yeah.
It's a good, funny point, but at least, but that's just Monday night quarterbacking because he still fundamentally made the decision. Now he wouldn't have been able to make any kind of decision. It would have been 30 fucking minutes of, do I have the moral right to do this, that, or the other? And ooh, I'm feeling bad about it. Think of in, Man of Steel when General Zod, who's literally about to murder a family, is ready to do it, and Superman is forced to break his neck. Think of how long it takes Superman to figure that out. Think of how bad he feels afterwards. Not to mention all of this destruction that has occurred throughout the world by virtue of Superman taking his fucking time to figure it all out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is and funny enough, the one good thing about Batman versus Superman, at least they had Batman realize this guy's a fucking asshole, and I don't like him for good reason.
Yeah, exactly. It made sense, and that's the thing that endless moral navel gazing, and ultimately a lack of moral self-confidence. Well, look, I've said it before. I think that the whole issue of the lack of moral self-confidence comes from undermining epistemic certainty. Since you cannot know that which is true from that which is false, therefore you cannot really make any kind of moral judgment. And see if that was what was killed during the 60s, the ability to determine what is true from what is false. The inevitable byproduct during the age we're living in is this notion that, who's to say what's right and what's wrong? And so who are you to judge? Which I despise. I honestly despise this notion that, not that there's anything wrong with that, attitude. I call it moral normcore, Normcore is the fashion of like khakis and a button-down shirt, right? And it's like the classic, kind of like loafers kind of look, khakis, button-down shirt, and you can go anywhere practically. That's normcore, the notion of normcore. But there is such a thing as moral normcore, the notion that Not that there's anything wrong with it. You can do anything so long as it complies with the simple and trivial condition of like, so long as it doesn't hurt anybody or interfere with anybody else's rights, you can do whatever you want, morally speaking, which I think is just absurd. Okay, but that's the age we're living in.
What was? Yeah, it is. But what then? What? This is a good question. What is the last film or show or whatever you saw that had or portrayed a masculine sense of moral confidence?
Die Hard.
Good choice. I actually think there is one sooner that it went under the radar, but I did see it. Bone Tomahawk.
I never saw it.
Bone Tomahawk stars Kurt Russell, among others, during it's a Western.
Mm-hmm.
But during the Western, basically the small town that they're from gets raided by a band of murderous, cannibalistic savages, the Indians.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of things going on. One, there's male confidence that we have to, get these guys and rescue the prisoners they've captured. They're risking life and limb to do it, and they're not afraid to say these guys are objectively savages. They are not worth the fretting over, is it right to get them? No, they deserve what's coming for them, and they go out and they strike to achieve what they've set out to do, namely rescue the hostages that have been taken. Mm-hmm. It is from the filmmaker who is directing this upcoming film with Vincent D'Onofrio and Mel Gibson about the cop story that they basically, it's like right-wing cops who got fucked and are now trying to make some living in the aftermath of it. Mm-hmm. The writer and director more or less has kind of, whether he'd admit it or not, has sympathies to our side. It's just very clear from the stories, but it's a film well worth watching. It went under the radar, but it also stars one of the last great masculine characters, Kurt Russell. I mean, Kurt Russell he's getting older.
Yeah.
But his presence is very much there. People still look up to Kurt, and I'm glad to see that he's still in the running to some extent.
Yeah, I think that Kurt Russell. It's weird because I think that he's a much better actor than people give him credit for, or he's had the opportunity to show. I always think of his role in Big Trouble in Little China, which is a comedic masterpiece. I thought that was just the funniest picture. I still think that his character, what was his name, Burton? I forget that.
Jack Burton.
Jack Burton. Yeah. It's just the funniest.
Hey,
character.
I'm a reasonable guy, but I have just experienced some unreasonable things.
Yeah.
And he's basically doing a
John Wayne.
John Wayne impression. Funny because during those great John Carpenter movies, Snake Plissken is basically a Clint Eastwood impression.
Yeah.
And Jack Burton is basically a John Wayne impression. Yeah. And they work. They both work.
They work really well. Yeah. And I wonder what the Thing's impression is. I think that might be on the up and up.
I think that's just him. Yeah. That's just him. Yeah.
Yeah. Because Snake Plissken, yeah, totally. That was Clint Eastwood. It's just hilarious. Just call me Snake. It's just a great role, By the way, obscure fact, the novel of Escape from New York is really good. It was a novelization. Like, I don't know if they still do that, where they take a movie and they hire some writer. Yeah, still do it? Okay, well, Alan Dean Foster was the king of that. But the guy who wrote it was a guy called Michael McCreary, I think. It doesn't matter. The novel is really, really good. I mean, really well written, well paced, and it puts in a lot of little details that seem to have been original that just really gave the novel a little extra oomph. I read it, I don't know. I mean, I read it when it came out. I bought it, right? And then by chance, about 12, 15 years ago, I was like going through old books, and I came across it, and I sat down and read it in one go. And I read it as a grown man, because at the time I read it when the movie came out, and I was 12, 13 years old, something like that. And I read it as a grown man, and I was like, wow, this holds up pretty well, as a novel, as just, novel writing. Was a fast-paced, it wasn't like the crappy kind of book that you would think it would be. I was, surprised. But anyway, there's just a minor detour. Kurt Russell is definitely like a man's man kind of guy, but he was never big in the world's consciousness. The ones who are
No, I
big.
mean yeah, I mean he had very interesting and quirky roles, and he had enough of a following, but it was never like you can't. I can go back and point to many iconic performances he gave,
Yeah,
but I can't go to one and say that set the kind of country's mind on fire. You know what I
no,
mean?
no, no. He never had that kind of role, which is a pity. But okay, be that as it may. What how can I put it? There's always the issue of like representation, whether the characters or the actors being played in the movie are kind of like a priori because the studio execs figure, oh, this is the character or the actor that we want, or if it's a posteriori, oh, the people respond to this actor and therefore we're going to put him in more roles and get bigger roles. In the case of Chris Pratt, for example, it seems that it's what the audience wants, what the people want, because he was a minor actor in The Office, and his career took off
Parks
fairly
and Rec.
quickly. What? Or Parks and Recreation?
Parks and Rec.
Yeah, and his career took off pretty quickly. To tell you the truth, before Gardens of the Galaxy, what movie had he been in that was sort of like on the radar?
I can't even think of one because I just assumed he went straight from Parks and Rec to Guardians and the Jurassic Park movies. You know what I mean?
Well, be that as it may, I mean, still, that's kind of like a meteoric rise, right? And he really held together the Guardians of the Galaxy picture. I mean, as a character, what he was supposed to do, he has the presence, he has the charisma. I mean, he's got charisma to burn, quite frankly. But it's that childishness. I recently saw Avengers 4, which I thought was just, oh, god damn,
The Infinity War.
the Infinity War, whatever it's called. Yeah, the most recent one, where they all die in the end, right? Um, and
Again, a very cheap, lazy version of a kind of admittedly compelling story in the actual comics. Unfortunately,
yeah, yeah, I have no
yeah.
idea.
In the story, basically, Thanos is he gets the gems and everything, but he does it because he's in love with in the Marvel cosmic universe. Death is personified as a living being, but it's a woman, and he wants to prove himself worthy of her affections, and like a typical bitch of a woman, she tells him, Lo, you have to prove it to me. You have to prove it to me by destroying half the world or the universe, just snuffing it out in an instant. He says, to prove my love, I'll do that. And she still fucks around with him. And this narrative afterward is his endless frustration with this fucking woman. And it's kind of interesting within that context, but most of that story is gone. It's not present in the movie.
No, yeah, but be that as it may. Oh well, there's Josh Brolin. He's kind of like a man's man kind of guy, but he gets relegated to roles where he's sort of like either the villain or quasi villain, or the
Yeah, no, or he's like Llewellyn in No Country for Old Men, where he's a figure there, but he's not like an authority figure. He's just a guy trying to survive
yeah.
and failing to do so.
Yeah, that was a weird picture, I have to admit. I am very ambivalent about it. I can't make up my mind whether I thought it was like really interesting and semi brilliant or just stupid. Well, that's for another conversation. But going back, I'm deeply disturbed by these adolescent figures that, let's face facts, they are coming from the audience. Because the audience responded to Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart was a trivial actor, if
Yeah.
you think about it, in the scheme of things. But he was a compelling presence, and people identified with him in a way. And that's what made him a star. And he truly was a star because, you could tell a movie star when he can be the lead actor in a drama or a comedy, and people still go. And The African Queen and Casablanca, and then The Cane Mutiny. I mean, he put paid. He's the guy. He was the guy who had it, and people loved him. People really, he was the guy, the man that people aspired to be or be with, right? And and he was
And
like,
his charisma kind of is what carried most of this appeal because he starred in, and most of the big classics are kind of throwaway B films up until, let's say, the mid-ish 40s. I mean, people still to this day fail to realize that Casablanca was just another B kind of pro-war propaganda film.
Yeah. Yeah.
It achieved more than that, and largely because of his performance and Ingrid's performance. But that something you should really keep in mind, I mean the audience, is with him. He rose because of his personality, because of his very masculine way of thinking and his features and everything. I mean, they didn't give him the easy breaks to do that. That was all him.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a, but the people wanted him. That's why he went up the ladder. Okay. He never would have otherwise. But so what the people ask today, what the people idolize and lionize is just this goofy guy who can't protect anything. He needs like the strong, independent woman. And they always shove the strong, independent woman. I'm sick and tired of her.
Well, even though you do have, like I said, I do think you have big known names. I actually don't think we have any stars who are people you look up to. I don't think people look up to anybody that way anymore. I mean,
No.
yeah, like I said, they're popular people. I'm not going to deny that. But, I don't think films right now, even the big blockbuster ones, are those for like, I have to see the latest picture of this guy or the other guy because I want to be like this guy or the other guy. That doesn't happen anymore.
No.
So, we were doing like a mental exercise of, if you were to recast one of the old movies, who would you put in there? And I kept telling you, it's very hard because nobody has the weight of those old actors.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're absolutely right that nobody today has that weight, and there's also the issue of social media, because so many actors today feel that they have to sort of like show their private lives and how they quote unquote really are, and they refrain from. They don't refrain from stripping away their own privacy. The only actor who does that to an extent is who remains sort of elusive is Tom Cruise, or he did so for quite a while until he just sort of like self-destructed in the early 2000s. But now he seems to be back on point of just keeping his private life out of the public eye. He only appears to promote his movies, and the rest of the time he's just gone. You never see him, which is the way to build a successful franchise. But today, so many people feel that they need to parade around on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all the rest of it that, there's no mystique. They're the guy next door. He's just like me, except, he's rich and he's handsome and he's a big movie star in Hollywood, But he's just like me in the sense of being, a doofus. I don't know. I'm.
Well, you think ultimately at the end of the day, right now, people are afraid of a masculine figure in part because this is the reaction I get outside of movies, but it may be related. I've never seen anybody get as angry or upset as the moment when they realize someone is making a judgment call on them. Well, then people lose their shit. And if you have a figure like that to look up to, they're going to make a judgment call, right? I mean, it's just by virtue of, if you have a standard, the standard is defined by what it's not as much as by what it is. And so when you have that around, people are like, well, how dare you suggest that blah, 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 blah. And I think that's part of it. Nobody wants to feel like you're fucking with their little playpen of things that they need or want or do, what have you. That could be it.
I don't know. It just depresses me. It just depresses me horribly that all of the exemplars for young men, all of the idols. Look, I remember being a boy, and when I was a boy, just like every other boy, there were guys that I idolized. Later I'm sort of embarrassed, of course. Lee Majors is like cool. When I was 6 years old, I thought that Lee Majors was like the shit, right? And now I'm a bit embarrassed, quite frankly, right? And there are lots of other examples like that. But the thing is, see, when I was growing up, there was an ideal of a guy that I wanted to be like, okay, that I thought was really, really cool. I mean, shit, and this embarrasses me to no end, but I remember when I was like 6, 7 years old, trying to arch my eyebrow the way that Lee Majors did because I thought it was cool. Okay. And it's so silly, right? And, but little boys need that. Boys and
Well,
adolescents need that guy that you look up to and you want to be like him,
well, for me, oddly, and this may be embarrassing myself because maybe it explains why I'm a little bit of an asshole. It was Jack Nicholson for me. The funny thing was the first thing I encountered him in is, of all things, Batman. So he's the Joker
Mm-hmm.
in Batman. But through there, I then uncover him in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I was exposed to very early
Mm-hmm.
as a young kid, and then all of the other Jack roles, like anything Jack did, that kind of, like I said, it's somewhat reminiscent of Clark Gable, the confident man who pokes his finger at obvious bullshit. Like I love
Well,
in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest when his assessment of Nurse Ratched is spot on, and I've used that reaction a number of times when I see women like Nurse Ratched. And he's like,
yeah.
"You don't like Nurse Ratched?" He's like, I don't want to break up the meeting or nothing, but she's a bit of a cunt, ain't she? What do you mean? And then what's great about the movie is that the psychiatrist doesn't say, how dare you use that term? He says, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
He says, well, she likes a rigged game. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Actually, it's funny that you mentioned Nicholson because my first encounter with Nicholson was Terms of Endearment. It came out when I was 16 years old, and I saw it in the theater when it came out on its first run. And I'd heard of Jack Nicholson. I was sort of like vaguely aware of him, that he was like some big actor, right? And I was aware that my parents were kind of shocked because he seemed like a middle-aged guy because he was roughly their age. And so they were a little bit shocked that, holy shit, Jack Nicholson is playing a middle-aged guy, right? And I remember watching the picture and like, yeah, he was like this middle-aged guy, but the scene of Terms of Endearment that always struck me so hard. And I remember when I saw it the first time, it struck me, and the few times I've seen it since, is when he goes to visit Shirley MacLaine's character in wherever this the hospital town where they're treating the daughter, right, for cancer.
Right.
And he's in the pool of the motel that they're staying at, and he's walking down the stairs when he's introduced into the scene, and Shirley MacLaine sees him, and he looks like a middle-aged guy, and trying, and clearly you can tell that he's at a loss as to what to do or how to act, but he wants to help as best he can, right? Now, Terms of Endearment is an extremely female-oriented picture. But what I found striking, that I could not articulate at the time that I saw it, of course, but I understand now, is that what I was struck was by, see, he was very masculine, and yet he was making a concerted effort to give comfort to this woman in this terrible time of crisis that she was enduring. That he didn't really know how to do it, but he was trying in a very not ham-fisted way, but in a way that was not with his
Not
usual
perfect, but the best. Yeah, not perfect, but the best he could, and with sincerity.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, sincerity. You nailed it. See, there was this sense of sincerity. He's truly trying to be there, right? Whereas a lot of the now they're like, oh, let's have a hug, and there's something fundamentally smarmy and insincere about their efforts at emotional support. That contrasts starkly with Nicholson's performance in that scene. You see what
Well,
I'm
that
saying?
his in the movie in the whole is a great kind of way to kind of tease this out, because there's a lot, because his character in the film does something that feminists would hate, which is he's a male figure to help free Shirley MacLaine from the bonds of her bitchdom, which is that scene when they first go out, and Shirley MacLaine's continuing to be a cunt, and Jack's like, we're gonna need a lot of drinks. She says, what, to break the tension? He says, no, to kill the bug that has crawled up your asses. and
Yeah.
and even at the end, though, when after their date kind of goes sideways and they go back home, and she goes, Garrett, why do you insist on shocking and insulting me? You know that I hate that. You must know that. He says, well, Aurora, I don't know what it is about you, but you do bring out the devil in me. And he does it in a way which I think people probably perceive, I hope they do, which is to say, yeah, I'm kind of a jerk, but you're so compelling that even I will do all of these things to get you. And she needs to know that, because before she's a stuck-up kind of structured woman, and kind of treats her daughter like whatever, an appendage to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But Garrett is trying to say, no, you have within you the capacity to be a compelling, healthy, socially adjusted woman.
Yeah.
Worthy of the superhero ex-astronaut like me's attention. And he gives her confidence, even though at the end of the day, he's not the kind of guy who's you can tie down to a long-term relationship. That's the other bit of the movie that is interesting. He's like, I can't be your husband. He's not a husband type. But that's part of the interesting story. He is part of the energy that revitalizes our main character. And I think feminists hate that. The fact that a man is needed is disgusting to them.
Yeah. I think you're fundamentally right that it is disgust that a woman needs a man. That old feminist saw, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. A woman needs a man like a fish needs water. It's the medium that they swim in. They need that water. But you're right, feminism and which has been inculcated in all of our educational establishments in our society dictates that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, and it hurts women, and they don't seem to realize it. I feel sorry for them, because at least guys still realize that they do need women. And I know a lot of the audience is going to say, oh, coach, you're cucking out. You're like a coach blue pill, crap like that. Fuck off. The fact of the matter is men do need women, like it or not. Okay. We're a symbiotic species or two species that can only exist and endure in some symbiosis. And that's a hard reality of it. But it's very disappointing. It's very disappointing how our culture has turned its back on young men, and yeah, I'm sort of like at a loss. I'm spinning my wheels at this point.
But I mean, that's the conclusion, right? I mean, we were trying to, some sense, talk about downgrade, right?
Yeah.
We used to have grade A Angus steak. Now we have gristle.
Yes, that's exactly right. And on that black-pilled note, I think we'll call it a podcast. And so, this has been the Coach and Benway podcast. Thank you so much for listening to us, and we will catch you next time.